Hello, Professor Lev Manovich. Can you hear us? Okay. Hi, Professor Manovich. Could you hear us? Professor Lev Manovich is in Shanghai, so he will give this talk remotely. Hello. So in the meantime, I will introduce. I believe no one doesn't know Professor Lev Manovich, right? So I will just read from Wikipedia in case you wanted to see it again. So Professor Lev Manovich is an artist, author, and theorist of digital culture. He is a distinguished professor at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Manovich played a key role in creating 4 new research fields: new media studies, software studies, cultural analytics, and AI aesthetics. Manovich's current research focuses on generative media, AI culture, digital art, and media theory. And Manovich is the founder and director of the Cultural Analytics Lab. It used to call Software Studies Initiative Lab in the past, but now it's called the Cultural Analytics Lab, which pioneered use of data science and data visualization for the analysis of massive collections of images and videos like cultural analytics. Yeah, and he's the author and editor of 15 books, including The Language of New Media. I believe every student has read that in the past dozens of years, which has been translated into 14 languages. Manovich's latest academic book, Cultural Analytics, was published in 2020 by the MIT Press. So let's welcome Professor Lev Manovich in MIT remotely. Hello, could you hear us?
Hi, yes, shall I get started?
Great, yeah, welcome. Yeah, you can start.
Great, yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. I wish I was doing it in person, but I'm a professor at the Graduate Center at CUNY, but in 2020 when COVID started, me and my wife, who is from Korea, decided that maybe we'll move to Korea, it'll be safer. And I continue teaching on Zoom, and then the university just allows people to do it. So I've now been living in Korea for over 6 years, and at the moment I'm in Shanghai, where I haven't been for 19 years, and so proud and so excited about everything China achieved and this amazing city of future. But today we'll talk about present and future, which is AI. So let me share my screen. Okay. Oh, actually, no, that's not what I wanted. Sorry, I was too fast. Okay, I think we'll go here. Okay, do you see my slides?
Yes, but do you want to make it like full screen?
Yeah, I will make it full screen. Just
okay.
A moment. I will make it. Okay, how about now? How about now?
Yeah, great.
Perfect. Okay, so I have 20 minutes, so I'll have to cut a lot. So let's see, and it's almost 11 p.m. in Korea. So I will try my best, but it may be a bit rough around the edges. So the conversations and the writing about generative AI will be often treated as a social phenomenon to be critiqued, an ethical problem to be debated, or a disruption, including disruption to kind of movie-making industry, which has to be assessed. These are all valid concerns. But they don't tell us much about the specific properties of AI as a creative medium. So if you're a filmmaker, motion graphic designer, or teach visual media to students like me, you actually want to know what is this medium is. Right? We are familiar with such analysis of photography, painting, digital media, film, but in the case of AI, because it's generative AI, because it emerged just a few years ago, it's developing very quickly, and people discuss some of its properties, but I think not in a very systematic way. So my presentation today is a part of what I think will become my future book, which will be my third book on Gen AI, where I will discuss a number of properties, which of course, some of them may change, but some of them I think are still built into this medium, so they remain to exist. And the key questions, right, which I want to ask: what are the affordances of this new medium? What are its constraints? And what are its limitations? What artistic strategies can we develop to work with and against its unique properties? And the limitations is particularly important because if you think about evolution of art, or including evolution of cinema, often the limitations is what actually moves the art forward. So think about 9s and 10s, when Griffith and Roberts invented the modern language of kind of film editing, film montage. Why? Because you couldn't shoot, right, for very long with the camera, maybe I think a couple of minutes or maybe even less. And another driver behind the development of modern cinema language was the fact that you couldn't record sound. Right? So limitations is often what drives the medium forward. So given my time constraints, I will only be able to discuss maybe 3 characteristics or 3 properties of Gen AI as artistic medium, but in the book I'll discuss 10 or 12. Sorry. Okay. So the first one is a trade-off between variability and control, which is maybe the most important one. So Gen AI gives us unprecedented speed of creation, editing, and generation of variations, but typically at the expense of precise control over details. And this is how this medium fundamentally works. You extract patterns from large collection of media from your training data, and then AI can generate new artifacts using prediction. Not deterministic way, but using predictions. And therefore, this lack of control is not a temporary limitation, which will be somehow solved. It's a constitutive property of this medium. Right? In fact, when you think about it, you realize that probabilistic generation and total authorial control are intentional by definition. Right? Because if you have complete control over every single detail, you can only make one version of your product, of the artifact. Right? So the moment you give AI some leeway and allow it to change composition, lighting, textures, perspective, and so on, right? You can generate many more, potentially endless variations, but you don't control each one. Right? So this is what makes it exciting, but at the same time, this is what can make it frustrating if you're a film director, cinematographer, motion graphic designer, animator, and you want the creativity, right? And the kind of innovation which AI can bring, but at the same time, once it creates something you like, you want to have complete control, right? So there's this tension. So as I said, although Gen AI produces great quality results, designers and other creative professionals do not have complete control over every detail, because the model makes countless decisions autonomously. So let's say you're designing a book cover or advertising photo for a product, and the client is not going to pay if the product, let's say, is a perfume bottle, for example, or new motorcycle or whatever, right? Is going to have different proportions, or logo is going to be different, and so on. But here's what's interesting about it conceptually, right? So we can think about our whole creative universe and the existing categories which we use to divide it. So we talk about, for example, media types, photography versus painting, moving image versus still image, and so on. We talk about mass-produced or commercial versus unique or independent, 2D versus 3D and 4D, static versus interactive, and so on. But now the adoption of generative AI gives us, in a way, like a new system of categories, where we can say that we can divide the creative universe in all media between one part, where high precision control over tiny details and what can be called editability, right? The ability to edit the result is absolutely crucial, and then the other part of the universe where it's not. So if you're an amateur casual user, right, you want to make a postcard for your friend or whatever, right? As long as the result looks good, right, so it fits with a kind of commonplace like aesthetics, you're happy and you don't care if some little things are not where you want them, but again, if you're a professional designer or a media maker, you want. But here's what's interesting. AI also gives us the third choice, right? Because you can get the generative AI in some cases to behave in a completely predictable manner, but at least generate predictable outputs even if we don't control how it gets there. So for example, let's say I'm using the AI image model and I have a photograph or generated photograph of a model wearing some outfit, and now I want to generate like a view from different position, right, to replace a piece of your clothing. And in this case, right, the model is constrained, and you more or less maybe it will take a few time, but you'll get exactly what you want. Even if in another case, which is even more convincing, is basically doing web coding, right? So when you do web code, for example, all my slides now, right, including these slides, I do by asking HTML to do design, and asking Claude to do the design, and Claude does it by writing HTML code, right? And then, because it's HTML code, I can say, okay, take this heading and move it 10 pixels to the right. Or take the font and make it, 5 pixels bigger, and so on. Right? So in the case where you can write code, you can generate outputs using code, you get both the AI imagination and the complete control. And of course, the examples of it also kind of connecting, for example, like AI agents, right, Claude and others, to tools like Blender, because when you think about 3D computer graphics, right, it's kind of code, right? I mean, you have vertices, you have colors, right? So it can be described, right, as a data set or data structure. It needs to be done by Claude. But in the case of cinema, right, or moving images, we like the richness, right? The kind of grissiness, the details of a live imagery, which is captured with camera, captured with lens, right? So there is a whole genre, right, of 3D computer animation, and we also generate creatures, and we do all kinds of post-production work on films, but there is something very important for humans to actually see something which is captured with camera. So here we have to deal with this tension between the AI ability to generate endless variations and the fact that we can't often control every details. Okay? So these are just, all of it. The professionals, but here just examples of variations. I produce my own work with AI. As I'm also an artist, I had a couple of personal exhibitions of my AI work 2 years ago. Typically, I use Midjourney. I generate hundreds of variations of one theme, and then I select a dozen, and then I spend hours editing them in Photoshop and Lightroom. So this is one image series which kind of shows something connected to my childhood. I grew up in Moscow and during the communist period, so to speak. And I was playing with prompts, and at some point, Midjourney generated these images of people and going to work in the early morning, and somehow they were sleeping, and I really liked it. And you have here, right, examples of variations all generated from the same prompt. Right, here's another example, right, also from another series, which I call drawing rooms. And again, right, I don't just use prompt, I also use image references, sometimes up to 6, to in a way, right, get AI to do something which it's not designed for, but again, all these things are generated from the same references and the same prompts. So let's go now to the next one. So this, I think, equally is fundamentally important. If you remember Marshall McLuhan, right, in his famous books such as Gutenberg Galaxy and Understanding Media in the early 60s, and argued that communication media shapes how people think. With Gen AI, we encounter something fundamentally different, the kind of reverse. Because Gen AI is the first medium which itself thinks. More precisely, it performs cognitive tasks, as well as, often better than, most humans, including domain experts. Now, I'm not suggesting that I know how AI actually works, right? Nobody knows. And that AI truly thinks, not at all. But when we look at outputs, when we have conversational AI agent, for all practical purposes, it does look to us like thinking, like we're talking to a very capable and very, very smart person. And that's what I mean. It's a medium which practically, functionally thinks. Okay, you all know about cognitive abilities. For example, I also use it as a visual artist. So because I develop a painting, I kind of take pictures and I show it to AI every day. When we have a discussion, AI gives me suggestions right on how to improve it. And even me, who's an artist and educator, with dozens of years of experience, often I have intuition about something doesn't work, but AI is able to articulate it right much more precisely than me. But what makes this unprecedented is not even cognition itself. Because if you know something about the history of early analytic art, which begins like in the late 50s and early 60s, right, where artists, composers, poets begin to write computer programs, right, to make art, in some ways, these programs also function a bit like human thinking. Because think about computer programming, right? You have certain control structures. What if when, right? So when particular condition is encountered, the program does A, if not, it does B. And these control structures, right, obviously are similar to some properties of our everyday thinking. Right? But the difference is, of course, with functionality, even though a computer language supports with functionality, in each case, a particular program, for example, we can look right at this kind of famous early visual art by Vera Molnar, right, Hungarian-based artist. This is 1969, right? So the decisions which go into a program, which creates this elaborate grid-like structure, she had to put it by hand. And another big difference is that when she writes a program, or when anybody else writes a computer program to do something else, this program can only do things it's programmed to do, right? So in this case, your program can only generate this kind of grid-like structures, whereas an AI model, right, can be trained to do many things, right? It's a true generalist. The same model can do taxes, right? It can chat with you about love. It can make images and video. It can make plans and so on and so forth, right? So it's a truly kind of renaissance. The AI is the real renaissance man with humans, so to speak, much more than Leonardo da Vinci. And here's what's interesting, right? So the AI can learn this capacity by absorbing the patterns from billions of web pages and billions of image and text pairs from the web. And this is what allows it to basically know how to learn code, know how to make photorealistic images, and so on and so forth. But because it learns, right, from all this data, which is online, and this data, in a way, is a reflection of our society, our culture, our values, right, its thinking also often defaults to the familiar, right? It kind of privileges, it has bias towards the ordinary as opposed to something marginal, experimental, right? This goes both for general thinking, but also for visual outputs. Right? Usually what it generates may look either ordinary, like you can do this kind of snapshot like photography, or be idealized, depending on how the training data was selected and used instructions. But right, it's difficult for AI to then complete in the visual languages because, again, it absorbs and is biased by what already exists. And I think what's interesting is that its superhuman cognitive abilities and its, let's say, cultural conservatism, right, are part of the same process, right? They go together, they emerge from the same reason. Okay, sorry. So this is just example. Okay, no, sorry. This is the next one. So the next one about creativity, right? Which is a very hard question. So lots of people like to repeat this idea that AI can be creative, but that's of course not true. So there's a field of creativity studies. It emerges in the 1950s. First in psychology. It's a kind of multidisciplinary field. You can go to the Wikipedia page about creativity, and it's like, it has hundreds of references, so it's a huge field. And in this field, the researchers have defined, have proposed very different models which explain how creativity works, and they also defined various types of creativity. So we can look at the most popular of these models, which is by famous researcher Margaret Boden, who around 1990 proposed 3 types of creativity: combinatorial, exploratory, and transformation. So combinatorial means you combine with the existing ideas. So that definitely fits AI, right? Because AI is very good at remixing existing sources. In the case of images, right, you can remix between existing styles, existing artist signatures, right, existing genres, and interpolate between them. The second one she defined around 1990 was exploratory, when you kind of freely explore a particular direction. I think AI is also kind of right, I think perfect for this. So in fact, with kind of examples of my own images which I shown, I think fit very well this idea of exploratory creativity, right? I give the AI the direction, I give it certain constraints, and when it explores systematically, right, this kind of practically infinite space, right, it is part of latent space, so to speak, right? So exploratory creativity. But it's not clear that the AI is capable of transformational creativity, which is, according to Boden, was a type of creativity where you actually come up with completely new way look at a particular field, a completely new way of doing things. So I think in the case of cinema, we can think again of Griffith in 1910s, or maybe people like Sergei Zestein and Zilli Goethe from 1920s, or let's say somebody like Godard and other people from the French New Wave from 1960s, and so on and so forth, right? A kind of new artistic languages which really define cinema. So it's not, I'm not saying that we know for sure that AI can do that, but so far we haven't seen examples of it. But it doesn't mean that we can do that. So I will skip this. Yeah, these are just examples from one of many resources which exist online, which shows you like all the different styles of media which AI can simulate. So this is a website called Mid Library. So it's we had it for a few years from Journey, and what we do is we take the same prompts and we test them by saying ta-ta-ta-ta-ta in the style of or by X, and it's both particular artists and particular media, right? So there are, I think, thousands of artists which we tested, and also all kinds of media which most of you never even heard of. Right? Whether AI can simulate well or not, that's a different story, that's a different chapter in my book. So one more property, and then we'll go to conclusion. Artistic identity without a distinct style. So that's also very interesting. In the modern period, artists, writers, composers, photographers, filmmakers, choreographers, architects, and others often have been identified by a very unique style, or if you prefer, their artistic language. So that importance in modern cultural history is equivalent with uniqueness, right? So if you created something which was unique, but something which we humans also like, you become an important artist and you enter the canon. And most artists in the 20th century continue to paint at the 19th century realism, but they remain to be completely unknown because we haven't introduced something dramatically new. Of course, some variation with a single style was allowed, as long as the creator works stylistically distinguish them from others. Now, in previous centuries, we can say the style is more collective than individual. However, a handful, very small number of exceptional artists did develop recognizable individual styles which stood apart from their school conventions. Del Greco, Rembrandt, Vermeer, Velázquez, Giorgio O'Keeffe, and so on. And yet each of those artists, right, in their maturity period developed a unique style, not multiple styles. Okay? So here, we have, right, 15th century, here we have Van Gogh, right? His style changes between Paris period, art period, and so on, but in each period he does have a distinct style. Okay, yeah, sorry, wait for when. Now, in the modern period, right, as I said, right, with Van Gogh, for example, it became possible, the artist was allowed, so to speak, to periodically change their style, even work in more one style at the same time, right? Think about Georg Richter or think about Picasso. This only emerged after modernism established that individual artist style is a kind of, in a way, self-constructed identity project, right? So you're allowed to change your identity over time. So identity, in a sense, would always claim about uniqueness. But the AI, right, something very fundamental, really new happens, which we see here, with a real separation now between the content, the composition, the iconography, and the rendering, right, the style, the artistic language, and the aesthetics, right? So you can write the same prompt and then say, this is the watercolor, this is the colored pencils, this is the engraving, this is the 3D rendering, this is the photo done with camera and with lens, right? So you can render the same scene, the same composition in hundreds of different styles. Okay? So I can also create new styles by mixing various names, right? For example, some images I would say, this is a drawing done with watercolor, pencils, oil painting, mosaic, right? Mix everything in, and etc. So I like, right, doing these experiments. I don't want to settle for one particular style. So given this, I mean, why do I need to choose a single style and stick to it? Okay? Well, I mean, right? It's a kind of right. But the problem is that traditionally, in the modern period and today, even though artists today, many artists do in video, installation, performance, and painting, this is more common in the kind of the binary world, but in the art market, right, if you're a painter or sculptor, you pretty much still need to have a single style, because if you're not, the curator is not going to know what to do with you. And we invite you to be in an exhibition, we give you commission, because we kind of want to know, we kind of can predict what you're going to do. And also the collectors are not going to buy it, because the collector wants to put your artwork in their big house, and our collectors come and we say, oh my God, you have artwork by this artist X, but if the artist X changes their style every 10 days, it's not going to work. Now, what's also interesting is that if you look at the history of human culture, the diversity of styles was much larger than the diversity of content. So style was not just an afterthought, it was very essential. But when you think about content in classical Western art, right, you have a small number of content templates. Scenes from Bibles, crucifixion, portrait, since the 17th century, still life, and a few other types, right, which are repeated endlessly, but the styles change. The portrait of Velázquez and the portrait of Van Gogh are completely different things. In fact, the key modern artist did not invent new iconography, didn't invent new content. Paul Cézanne did not invent new content for painting. He was painting still lifes, right? But he showed us how to see them in a new way. So the interesting question is, what our creators will do now? Are we going to simply kind of pretend that this new characteristic of AI doesn't exist and just continue business as usual? Or will gradually our understanding of uniqueness in creative identity change in some fundamental ways? So that's a very interesting question. So I will go to conclusion, so just 2 more minutes. So in my talk, I explored only 3 properties of generative AI, the artistic medium. In my book, Artificial Statics, written with Emmanuel Areri and available online, finished in 2024, we talk about many more properties, and I will talk about more in my future book. But I think one of the key questions remains completely open. What kind of art does this medium make possible that was not possible before? Or maybe it's a wrong question completely. Because computers have always been designed, right, and programmed to simulate existing media in existing social and cognitive operations, right? So first we have word processing in the 80s, which simulates using typewriter. Then we have a paint and design programs which simulate painting. We have Photoshop, where the name supplies and simulates dark-room photography and so on. And AI, of course, right, is developed to kind of simulate the conventions of film, animation, painting, photography, and so on, as they exist online in trillions of examples. So why should we expect AI to do something differently and to come up immediately with something new? Right? But then there's one more, maybe more fundamental question. So over the last 40 years, right, we developed and started to use a variety of digital tools, Maya, Photoshop, web browser, right, Google Earth, and so on. Plus, we have a culture of open source and the web, which allows with new tools and examples, right, to propagate right, instantly. And then we have GitHub and so on, where people can build on top of other tools, right? So there's this amazing culture, right, of software creativity. Software itself became a creative media. And now we have, right, AI, which allows people to do so-called web coding, web design, and when I look at my social media, kind of like post, which I see it, at every moment I see somebody developing some new tool, maybe it is designer developing a tool which allows you to select color combinations and make your designs, or some academic doing something else, right? And I'm sure that people who do film, video animation, and other types of images are designing these tools as well. So for the first time, programming has finally been really democratized. So given that we are in these new situations, right, where not only you can use existing tools, but in a way the creator has finally become a programmer, and at the same time, the AI capacities keep increasing, right, daily. What should be our strategies to be in this situation? In other words, how do we continue our creative lives? Shall we keep working for 20 years in our great novel? Or shall we write a new novel every day? But if writing a novel every day, it will still take years to publish it, because human society, human institutions are frustratingly slow. So how should we best use our new superpowers? That's my last open question. Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope it made some sense. I know with Zoom often audio is not transmitted very well, but I hope it was okay.
Thank you so much, Professor Lev Manovich. Yeah, I believe this is very inspiring. I mean, from a very thorough overview of all the these things happening with these cutting technologies this year, and also from your very deep and thorough background in all the new media studies, software studies, and other related fields. So thank